Hey everyone, welcome to the first ever episode of the Terror Tangents podcast, the horror podcast that's all over the place. I'm Jen, but you can find me on Spotify and Twitter at Scream Kebab. I love horror movies and could talk about them all day every day, but I have been known to occasionally go off on tangents. Since I actually don't know a ton of people in my daily life who like talking about horror movies as much as I do, I thought what could be better than recording my ramblings and forcing them upon all of you in the horror community. You're welcome. And I'm very excited to start this dialogue with you, and I hope you will enjoy the trip and also join in the discussion in the comments, so your voice can also be heard on the very important topics that we will be discussing. So what I wanted to discuss today is Ti West and his X trilogy. As I'm sure you know, the second film in the trilogy, Pearl, just opened in theaters on Friday, September 16th, and it is the origin story of the villain from the first film, X, which came out in March. I thought X was decent, but also a little disgusting and a bit sad because I have a lot of fears about aging myself, and if you've seen the movie, then you know what I'm talking about. But X was definitely worth seeing, and the trailer for Pearl at the end did pique my interest. In full disclosure, until recently I was not a big Ti West fan at all, and he was probably my least favorite horror filmmaker. I actually had issues with him dating back all the way to 2011 after he released his second film, The Innkeepers, which I did not like, by the way. Hated it! Do you guys remember Men on Film from In Living Color? I may be dating myself here, but In Living Color was so funny, and Damon Wayans and David Alan Grier are awesome. In Living Color. But anyway, yeah, I know it's probably a very unpopular opinion in this community, but The Innkeepers was the most boring haunted house movie I've ever seen. I mean, nothing happens. I attended a screening of the movie in Los Angeles, and the filmmaker and some of the cast were there, and I really wanted to like it, but I was very disappointed. So naturally, I was a little ticked off when Ti West then subsequently took it upon himself in a 2012 interview to bash William Brent Bell's found footage movie, The Devil Inside. Now, The Devil Inside was not a perfect film by any means, but it did have some scary scenes and offered an interesting take on possession, which I did enjoy. This is not a scene from that movie, by the way. This is a video of us giving our cat Goblin an exorcism. In the interview, Ti West singled out the movie and went in really hard, saying it was a ripoff and a scam, and he implied the filmmakers had sold out and made a bad found footage movie just because it was popular at the time. He also essentially insulted everyone who saw the movie by saying the audience was gullible and was duped into seeing it. What irked me the most about the interview, though, is that Ti West admitted that he hadn't even seen the movie, but everyone else just seemed to hate it. I mean, what is that about? We'll talk more about found footage movies in an upcoming episode, but I didn't think Ti West's prior body of work to that point was even remotely good enough to justify him trashing another filmmaker's horror movie he hadn't even seen. And I don't know if maybe there was some kind of personal beef between those two that I didn't know about, but it seemed pretty arrogant and dickish to me. And I'm sorry, but The Devil Inside was a hell of a lot better movie than The Innkeepers, if you ask me. It's also a little ironic because Ti West ultimately ended up releasing his own mediocre found footage movie called Sacrament a year later in 2013 that was essentially just a reenactment of the Jim Jones cult massacre. If you haven't seen William Brent Bell's movie The Boy, by the way, you should pause this right now and go watch it immediately. I don't want to give anything away, but you will not see the end of that one coming at all. It was fantastic. His new movie, Orphan First Kill, is also great with a fun twist as well. But it's a prequel, so obviously you'll need to see the original Orphan first if you haven't already. The original Orphan was absolutely bonkers. I saw it in a packed theater in LA on opening night back in 2009, and the entire audience collectively laughed out loud at the big reveal. I'm not sure if that is what the filmmakers intended for the reaction to be, but no one could believe the ridiculousness of what was happening. Orphan has definitely become a real cult favorite, though, and First Kill is a solid addition to the franchise. Now, in all fairness, Ti West did contribute a great segment to the found footage horror anthology VHS, and that movie was spectacular, even though I don't typically love anthologies. It is actually one of only a handful of movies that has really scared me in the last decade, so you won't hear any complaints about that movie from me. In fact, I have a huge framed poster from that movie on my wall, and it also spawned my love for filmmaking collective Radio Silence. They contributed the great segment called 103198. And if you haven't seen their films Southbound and Ready or Not, you are missing out. Scream 2022 was also a fantastic entry in the Scream franchise, and the guys in Radio Silence really took a huge risk making that film, since Scream has some very die-hard, vocal, and hard-to-impress fans, but the movie turned out awesome. Ty West's segment in VHS, which was called Second Honeymoon, was surprisingly very good and scary, so I will give him definite props for that. Honestly, at the time VHS came out, I thought Ty West could potentially be great, but only in small doses and only if he stuck to making shorts. I thought his first movie, The House of the Devil, would have been much more effective as a short film if it had been edited down and tightened up a bit. The first half of the movie was very strong and suspenseful, but I thought the second half was a little slow, and it just kind of devolved into a typical devil movie. Ty West's brief appearance in the 2011 horror movie You're Next was also hilarious. You're Next, a movie I also have a promo poster for on my wall, was a fabulous home invasion movie that had a great 80s slasher vibe. It was made by Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett, who also made a great contribution to VHS with their bookended segment called Tape 56. Their earlier and probably lesser-known movie, A Horrible Way to Die, is also a must-see if you haven't checked it out. A Horrible Way to Die shocked me with how good it was. I'm sitting there in the theater thinking I'm just watching a decent movie about a serial killer, but then everything literally got turned upside down, and that movie had me crying at the end. Yes, crying. It was a surprisingly emotional ending that I wasn't expecting, so I highly recommend that film if you haven't already seen it. I mean, who doesn't want a few tears with their horror, am I right? Actually, I usually don't, and I actually faulted The Haunting in Connecticut many years ago for how sad and emotional it was, but I digress. I think I've changed a little bit over the years because the new movie Barbarian that just came out in theaters on September 9th also made me cry at the end, but I didn't mind. Go see that movie right away too if you haven't already, and do whatever you can to avoid reading any spoilers. I will just say that it's very intense and downright crazy, but it also has many layers to it and touches on a lot of interesting and scary topics, so it's almost like watching two different movies in a double feature. Anyway, getting back to Ty West's X trilogy. Have y'all seen Pearl yet? In my opinion, Pearl was a superior movie to X. Mia Goth was fantastic. She gave an Oscar-worthy performance, and there are a couple of scenes in particular that I know will be studied in film school in the future, including an intense 5 or 6 minute monologue and an emotional scene over the closing credits. The movie did start off a little slow for me, and there were a couple of points where I thought I was just watching some perverted remake of The Wizard of Oz. I mean, I just kept waiting for them to slap some green paint on Mia Goth and bring in the dun-dun-dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. But as the movie progressed, it really pulled me in, and I ended up really liking the Technicolor bloodbath quite a bit. Based on the trailer, I was a little nervous going in that we were going to have to see some animals get killed in this film. As far as I'm concerned, you can pretty much do whatever you want to people in horror movies, and I won't bat an eye. But I really don't like watching animals get hurt. Unfortunately, some animals do die pretty early on in this movie, and this made it harder for me to empathize with Pearl overall. But thankfully, Ty West was somewhat kind to the audience and conducted most of the actual violence off screen. Speaking of animals getting hurt in movies, I feel like we're seeing a trend towards using CGI for animals in movies lately, which is great. Jordan Peele is a big animal advocate and used CGI very effectively for the chimpanzee in Nope, which, by the way, you should definitely check out if you haven't already. It wasn't my favorite Jordan Peele movie. I really loved Get Out and Us, but his movies are always really unique and interesting, and Nope was no exception. I actually really liked the first half of the movie quite a bit and thought it was very gripping and suspenseful and actually had a couple of really effective scary scenes, but the second half just wasn't quite as interesting to me once everything was revealed. The new addition to the Predator franchise, Prey, also killed off its fair share of animals in some pretty brutal ways, and I had a little trouble watching those scenes myself, but thankfully that used CGI too. Predator is not my favorite horror movie franchise, but Prey was very good. You should definitely check it out on Hulu if you haven't already. My cat Toons also really loved it, so there's that. She actually watches a lot of TV with us, but usually loses interest after about a minute or two. However, with Prey, she watched the entire film and seemed to really enjoy watching the animal attacks, so I think she'd give the movie 5 stars, or in her case, 4 paws up. Here's just a little clip of her watching the movie with us, and she pretty much looked like this for the entire film. She was mesmerized. I was a little surprised to find out that the new movie where the Crawdads sing used real animals as opposed to CGI, because some of the animals in that film actually looked like they were CGI to me. The film got some heat from PETA and others for that, and I do wish they had opted for CGI instead. This movie's not a horror movie, I know, but it did involve a murder and had an element of mystery to it, so we can still talk about it here. I definitely had a few problems with the movie, and it was too long overall and slow in parts. But I will say I was very satisfied with the ending. I hadn't read the book before seeing the movie, so I was pleasantly surprised by how it ended, and I do like it when a film actually manages to surprise me, because it's rare. Speaking of movies with very satisfying endings, have you seen Fresh on Hulu yet? Coincidentally, it also stars Daisy Edgar-Jones from Where the Crawdads Sing, and it was fantastic. Daisy Edgar-Jones seems to be in everything these days, but if you are going to only see one of her works, it should definitely be Fresh. We still have a few months to go in 2022, but Fresh is probably going to end up being in my top 5 or even top 3 for the year. I don't usually find myself wanting to physically jump out of my seat during horror movies, but at the end of this movie, I actually jumped up a little and rooted out loud for the main characters, so that's how exciting this movie was for me. Fresh also stars Sebastian Stan, who is sizzling hot, and a whole lot of fun to watch. On a side note, Sebastian Stan was also incredibly funny and cute in Pam and Tommy as well. Television series about celebrities are not my typical cup of tea, but that show was a whole lot of fun, so I'd highly recommend you check it out on Hulu as well. Pearl is not going to be my favorite horror movie of the year, but it's going to be pretty high up there as well. It will definitely be in the top 10, possibly in the top 5, although we do have a few months left to go and there are some real contenders coming out in the next several weeks, so we'll see. Ultimately, though, I do have to give props to Ty West for X and Pearl, and he has won me over with these two films. I'm also excited to see what he does with the final installment in the trilogy MaXXXine. We get to see a little teaser trailer for MaXXXine at the very end of Pearl, so make sure you stay until the end of the credits. But it's a little funny because when I saw the MaXXXine trailer, I remembered back to something that Ty West had said during that 2012 interview. He said that his first two movies, House of the Devil and The Innkeepers, both had female leads, and his third movie was going to be about a woman in space, and it was going to be this weird trilogy. So I started thinking, wait a minute, was he actually talking about this X trilogy and working on it way back then? But then I thought, how in the heck is he going to get this chick into space for the third film? I mean, the trailer did prominently show the radio tower next to the MaXXXine sign, and the movie takes place in 1985 when there was a lot going on with NASA and space travel, including flights of the Discovery and Space Shuttle Atlantis. And I mean, we did put Jason Voorhees into space in Jason X, right? So, anything's possible, you never know. I was pretty intrigued for a moment and thought maybe I had stumbled upon a real spoiler here. But then I came to my senses and did a little more research and found out that at the time of the interview, he was trying to get a movie made with Liv Tyler called The Side Effect, and it was a thriller about a woman who happens to get pregnant while traveling in space. It doesn't look like the movie was ever actually made or released, but I think that was probably the movie he was talking about in the interview, and MaXXXine will probably just take place on Earth. Oh, well, that's a shame. All right, well, I could go on forever, but we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode of Terror Tangents here for today. Definitely go see Pearl and let me know what you think in the comments. We've also got some really exciting new horror movies to look forward to in the coming weeks as well as we enter Halloween season, including Smile, Halloween Ends, and the now very controversial Don't Worry Darling. Where do you all come down on Spitgate 2022? Let me know in the comments. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and if you liked today's episode, please hit those like and subscribe buttons below. And until we meet next time, let's all try not to go off the rails.